Hey y'all, so this is a portion of our third chapter from Like Water for Chocolate. I'm going to start off on page 49 near the top, right where I left off after the model. Okay, so I'm starting off with the third paragraph on this page where it says, without a second thought. Okay, so go ahead and be reading right along with me. You're going to trace the line with your finger, and I'm going to stop every time we have a text-dependent question. All right? So, here we go. Without a second thought, she went to the patio to catch the quail. When she had caught 6, she carried them into the kitchen and got ready to kill them, which would be hard, having fed and cared for them for so long. With a deep breath, she took hold of the first one and twisted its neck, as she had seen Nacha do so often. But she used too little force to kill the poor quail, which went running pitifully around the kitchen, its head hanging to one side. She was horrified. She realized that you can't be weak when it comes to killing. You have to be strong, or it just causes more sorrow. It occurred to her that she could use her mother's strength right now. Mama Elena was merciless, killing with a single blow. But then again, not always. For Tita, she had made an exception. She had been killing her a little at a time since she was a child, and she still hadn't quite finished her off. Pedro and Rosaura's marriage had left Tita broken in both heart and in mind, like the quail. To spare the quail the pain she felt, Tita moved sharply and decisively, finishing him off as an act of mercy. With the others, it was easier. She just pretended that each quail had a soft-boiled egg stuck in its crop, and when she was delivering it from this suffering, mercifully, by giving its neck a good twist. All right, so go ahead and pause there. This is your second TDQ. So you can pause the video and take your time that you need to answer that question about that word merciless, where it said Mama Elena was merciless. Okay? All right, so we're going to keep going. We're at the top of page 50 now, right up here after twist. All right. So as a child, she would have chosen death over those soft-boiled eggs she was made to eat. Mama Elena forced them on her. She would feel her throat tighten, so tight she couldn't swallow any kind of food, until her mother gave her a smack that miraculously loosened the knot in her throat. Then the egg slid down without any problem. Feeling calmer, she had no difficulty in completing the next steps. So skillful was she that it seemed Nacha herself was in Tita's body doing all those things, dry plucking the birds, removing the viscera, getting them ready for frying. After the quail are plucked and dressed, their feet are pulled together and tied so that the bird keeps a nice shape after being browned in butter and sprinkled with salt and pepper to taste. The quail must be dry plucked because putting them in boiling water affects their flavor. That is just one of many cooking secrets that can only be learned through practice. Ever since she had burned her hands on the griddle, Rosaura wanted nothing to do with any kind of culinary activity. So she was ignorant of that and many other gastronomical secrets. But whether she did it to impress her husband Pedro, or to compete with Tita in her own territory, who can say? There was one day when Rosaura did attempt to cook. When Tita tried nicely to give her some advice, Rosaura became irritated and asked Tita to leave her alone in the kitchen. All right, so you're going to pause here. And I believe... Actually, never mind. That's... If you have a question about gastronomical, that might be your third TDQ. Go ahead and pause. If not, then you can go ahead and keep listening, okay? And I'll keep reading. All right, so we're at the bottom of page 50, okay? Right down here. The rice was obviously scorched, the meat dried out, the dessert burnt, but no one at the table dared display the tiniest hint of displeasure, not after Mama Elena had pointedly remarked. As the first meal that Rosaura has cooked, it isn't bad. Don't you agree, Pedro? Giving a real effort not to insult his wife, Pedro replied, No, For her first time, it's not too bad. Of course, that afternoon the entire family felt sick to their stomachs. That had been a tragedy, but nothing like the one that shook the ranch this time. Tita's blood and the roses from Pedro proved quite an explosive combination. But everyone was a little tense as they sat down at the table. But that's as far as it went with the quail, until the quail were served. It wasn't enough he'd made his wife jealous earlier, for when Pedro tasted his first mouthful, he couldn't help closing his eyes in voluptuous delight and exclaiming, "It is a dish for the gods!" Mama Elena knew that the quail was exquisite. Nonetheless, Pedro's remarks did not sit well with her, and she replied, "It's too salty." Rosaura, saying she was feeling sick and getting nauseous, barely took 3 bites. But something strange was happening to Gertrudis. On her, the food seemed to act as an aphrodisiac. She began to feel an intense heat pulsing through her limbs. An itch in the center of her body kept her from sitting properly in her chair. She began to sweat, imagining herself on horseback with her arms clasped around one of Pancho Villa's men, the one she had seen in the village plaza the week before, smelling of sweat and mud, of dawns that brought uncertainty and danger, smelling of life and of death. She was on her way to market in Piedras Negras when Chencha, the servant, when she saw him coming down the main street, riding in front of the others, obviously the captain of the troop. Their eyes met, and what she saw in his made her tremble. She saw all the nights he'd spent staring into the fire and longing to have a woman beside him, a woman he could kiss, a woman he could hold in his arms, a woman like her. She got out her handkerchief and tried to wipe these sinful thoughts from her mind as she wiped away the sweat. But it was no use. Something strange had happened to her. She turned to Tita for help, but Tita wasn't there. Even though her body was sitting up quite properly in her chair, there wasn't the slightest sign of life in her eyes. It was as if this strange alchemical process had dissolved her entire being in the rose petal sauce, in the tender flesh of the quails, in the wine, in every one of the meal's aromas. That was the way she entered Pedro's body, hot, voluptuous, perfumed, totally sensuous. With that meal, it seemed they had discovered a new system of communication, in which Tita was the transmitter, Pedro the receiver, and poor Gertrudis the medium, the conducting body through which the singular sexual message was passed. Pedro didn't offer any resistance. He let Tita penetrate to the farthest corners of his being, and all the while they couldn't take their eyes off each other. He said, "Thank you. I have never had anything so exquisite." It truly was a delicious dish. The roses gave it an extremely delicate flavor. After the petals are removed from the roses, they are ground with the anise in a mortar. Separately, brown the chestnuts in a pan, remove the peels, and cook them in water. Then puree them. Mince the garlic and brown slightly in butter. When it is transparent, add it to the chestnut puree, along with the honey, the ground pitaya, and the rose petals, and salt to taste. To thicken the sauce slightly, you may add 2 teaspoons of cornstarch. Last, strain through a fine sieve and add no more than 2 drops of attar of roses, since otherwise it might have too strong a flavor and smell. As soon as the seasoning has been added, remove the sauce from the heat. The quail should be immersed in the sauce for 10 minutes to infuse them with the flavor, and then removed. The smell of attar of roses was so penetrating that the mortar used to grind the petals will smell like roses for several days. The job of washing that and all the other kitchen utensils fell to Gertrudis. She washed them after each meal out on the patio so she could throw the scraps left in the pans to the animals. Since some of the utensils were large, it was also easier to wash them in the wash basin. But the day they had the quail, she asked Tita to do the washing up for her. Gertrudis was really stricken. Her whole body was dripping with sweat. Her sweat was pink, and it smelled like roses, a lovely, strong smell. In desperate need of a shower, she ran to get it ready. Behind the patio by the stable and the corn crib, Mama Elena had a primitive shower rigged up. It was a small room made of planks nailed together, except that between one board and the next, there were such big cracks that it was easy to see the person who was taking the shower. Still, it was the first shower of any kind that had ever been seen in the village. A cousin of Mama Elena's who lived in San Antonio, Texas, had invented it. It had a 30-gallon tank that was 6 feet high. First you filled the tank with water, then you got a shower using gravity. It was hard work carrying buckets of water up the wooden ladder, but it was delightful afterward just to open the tap and feel the water run over your whole body in a steady stream, not doled out the way it was if you bathed using gourds full of water. Years later, some gringos got this invention from Mama Elena's cousin for a song and made a few improvements. They made thousands of showers that used pipes, so you didn't have to do all that damn filling. If Gertrudis had only known! The poor thing climbed up and down 10 times, carrying buckets of water. It was brutal exercise, which made the heat that burned her body grow more and more intense, until she nearly fainted. The only thing that kept her going was the image of the refreshing shower ahead of her. But unfortunately, she was never able to enjoy it because the drops that fell from the shower never made it to her body. They evaporated before they reached her. Her body was giving off so much heat that the wooden walls began to split and burst into flame. Terrified, she thought she would be burnt to death, and she ran out of the little enclosure just as she was, completely naked. By then, the scent of roses given off by her body had traveled a long, long way. All the way to town, where the rebel forces and the federal troops were engaged in a fierce battle. One man stood head and shoulders above the others for his valor. It was the rebel who Gertrudis had seen in the plaza in Piedras Negras the week before. A pink cloud floated toward him, wrapped itself around him, and made him set out at a gallop toward Mama Elena's ranch. Juan, for that was the soldier's name, abandoned the field of battle, leaving an enemy soldier not quite dead, without knowing why he did so. A higher power was controlling his actions. He was moved by a powerful urge to arrive as quickly as possible at a meeting with someone unknown in some undetermined place. It wasn't hard to find. The aroma from Gertrudis' body guided him. He got there just in time to find her racing through the field. Then he knew why he'd been drawn there. This woman desperately needed a man to quench the red-hot fire that was raging inside her. A man equal to loving someone who needed love as much as she did. A man like him. Gertrude stopped running when she saw him riding toward her. Naked as she was, with her loosened hair falling to her waist, luminous, glowing with energy. She might have been an angel and a devil in one woman. The delicacy of her face, the perfection of her pure virginal body, contrasted with the passion, the lust that leapt from her eyes, from her every pore. These things, and the sexual desire Juan had contained for so long while he was fighting in the mountains, made for a spectacular encounter. Without slowing his gallop, so as not to waste a moment, he leaned over, put his arm around her waist, and lifted her onto the horse in front of him, face to face, and carried her away. The horse, which seemed to be obeying higher orders too, kept galloping, as if it already knew their ultimate destination, even though Juan had thrown the reins aside and was passionately kissing and embracing Gertrudis. The movement of the horse combined with the movement of their bodies as they made love for the first time, at a gallop and with a great deal of difficulty. They were going so fast that the escort following Juan never caught up with him. Liars tell half truths, and he told everyone that during the battle the captain had suddenly gone crazy and deserted the army. That is the way history gets written, distorted by eyewitness accounts that don't really match the reality. Tita saw the incident from a completely different perspective than the rebel soldiers. She watched the whole thing from the patio as she was washing the dishes. She didn't miss a thing in spite of the rosy clouds of steam and the flames shooting out of the bathroom, which made it hard for her to see. Pedro, too, was lucky enough to witness the spectacle, since he was just leaving the patio on his bicycle to go for a ride. Like silent spectators to a movie, Pedro and Tita began to cry, watching the stars act out the love that was denied to them. There was a moment, one brief instant, when Pedro could have changed the course of their story. Taking Tita's hands in his, he began to talk to her. Tita. But that was all. There was no time to finish. He was forced back to grim reality. He had heard Mama Elena shout, asking what was going on out in the patio. If Pedro had asked Tita to run away with him, she wouldn't have hesitated for a moment. But he didn't. Instead, he quickly hopped onto his bicycle and furiously pedaled away. He couldn't get the image of Gertrudis out of his mind. Gertrudis running through the field, completely naked. He must have been hypnotized by her ample breast swings from side to side. He'd never seen a naked woman before. During his relations with Rosaura, he'd never had any desire to see her body or caress it. They'd always used the nuptial sheet, which revealed only the necessary parts of his wife's body. When he was done, he would leave the bedroom before she became uncovered. But it was different with Tita. He longed to gaze at her that way, without any clothes on. He wanted to study, examine, investigate every last inch of her skin on her lovely, monumental body. Surely she'd look like Gertrudis. They weren't sisters for nothing. All right, so go ahead and pause there. This is one of your last, I think this is your last one, your last TDQ. Excuse me. So go ahead and figure out what that word monumental might mean. All right, y'all, so that's it. All right, let's get to those TDQs.